Oh, in this phase of V, I'll be checking out 8 wrestlers who failed off hard in 2025 from What Culture Wrestling. Okay, let's go.
This year, in WWE, Solo Sikoa was relegated from a major upper mid-card heel to a prelim clown. He was very handily defeated by Roman Reigns on the Raw is Netflix premiere, and fans were never again asked to take him seriously. Interestingly, amplifying the goofiness actually suited Solo, but once upon a time, this was a guy built up to be one of the first names on the WrestleMania whiteboard. Now he's a guy who pulls funny faces and hangs about with a bunch of other guys who do the same. The novelty of Nia Jax as a credible monster has faded. Carmelo Hayes, meanwhile, got absolutely nothing from Triple H. In AEW, the Paragon were nowhere near the tag team title scene. Roderick Strong lost a lot. AEW indulged Kyle O'Reilly's irksome goofy side a little bit too often, and while they were often good in the ring, Paragon had a nightmare against FTR back in April. Scorpio Sky embarked on yet another dud of a comeback run. Daniel Garcia feuded with MJF in 2024. In 2025, he was a permanent fifth wheel, constantly being mentored by somebody or other. Wrestling has a problem generally with pushing young wrestlers as ready-made stars. Garcia's booking, however, feels like an awkward, wayward teenager, not a prodigy. The same goes for Hook as well. The state of falling off is not permanent, however. Virtually everybody wrote off Kota Ibushi at the start of 2025, and while he ended it on the AEW injury list yet again, his superb Dynamite match opposite Kazuchika Okada was an elegant, mature performance until it was snatched away again. The following wrestlers aren't finished forever, but it will take some doing to repair their reputations. I'm Andy from What Culture, and here are 8 wrestlers who fell off hard in 2025. Number 8, R-Truth. On June 1st, R-Truth announced on X that WWE would not be renewing his contract, and the backlash was instant. This was the first time that the relationship between Triple H and his new massive audience felt strained. Nick Khan, the merciless corporate shark of WWE presidency, actually folded. He was instrumental in bringing R-Truth back to WWE, but R-Truth didn't want to be R-Truth anymore. He wanted to be Ron Killings. He wanted to go on a run as a serious player tired of being a clown. A vengeful, all-business Killings returned at Money in the Bank 6 days after the announcement as the major headline emerging from the PLE. 3 months later, he attempted to charge his smartphone using a toaster. A whopping 104 days had passed by between Killings asking you to take him seriously and R-Truth nearly electrocuting himself to death on SmackDown. There's something really sad about Killings using his leverage only to receive almost nothing in the way of promotional support and revert to his old caricature. This was bad in a way the wrestling landscape hasn't really reckoned with, and becomes a bigger creative disgrace the longer you think about it. Truth, for one night, was the most talked about wrestler on the planet, and then Triple H fumbled. The story told at Money in the Bank was a self-own on WWE's part. The promotion essentially said that they'd made a massive mistake and were pressured into correcting it. WWE never likes doing that, ever, which probably explains why, instead of committing to the idea, they behaved like none of it had actually happened and made you forget. Number 7, Jeff Jarrett. AEW seemingly had grand plans for Jeff Jarrett in 2025, a Sting-esque retirement run on a smaller scale. It had potential. Jeff was dismissed by AEW fans as a pollutant when he first rocked up in the company, but he was a revelation as a heel. Jarrett, thrilled by his own cheating ways in knowingly overbooked mid-card fare, was one of the lone highlights of 2023. His act was massively entertaining and it won fans over. Jarrett then turned face in 2024, vowing to win the Owen Hart Cup. Between his heartbreaking pre-tournament promo, his brutal loss to Hangman Page, and an absolute war with Bryan Danielson, Jarrett was on his way to becoming another Dustin Rhodes. The pathos of the grizzled old man wrestler is very powerful. So, what the hell happened? Jarrett promised to win the AEW World title before the sun set on his career. This magnetized him towards MJF, who had championship aspirations of his own. The resulting feud was a disaster. It was shocking because it wrote itself. Despicable, cocky young heel trying to rattle an older, wiser dude who had seen and survived more than true adversity. Two specific incidents, however, saw it retconned into oblivion. Firstly, Jarrett made the incredibly dumb decision to trade edgelord barbs with MJF in their infamously bad face-to-face confrontation. Jeff should have taken the high road in the promo. Instead, he came off looking like a sexist dinosaur, the lesser-spotted misogynistic Rex. Secondly, and this is Tony Khan's fault, Jarrett lost to Claudio Castagnoli at the very first step. The match was rubbish and the result even worse. It actually scanned as punishment booking at the time, which might make sense of Jarrett's subsequent disappearance. Number 6, The Rock.
Yes.
The Rock was sensational as the final boss in 2024. WWE was peaking creatively under Paul Levesque's regime, but one thing about Levesque's approach is that it was a little patterned and formal. When it works, Levesque shows you the destination, but makes you want to go there. As refreshing as this is, in contrast to Vince McMahon's worthless slop, it can get a little predictable. The Rock, morphing into the final boss, brought a very real anxiety and edge to what might be the best build to a WrestleMania match this side of 1989. He toyed with the idea of taking Cody Rhodes' spot, which, if nothing else, elicited real emotion, before backtracking and taking his bruised ego out on the uncrowned WWE champion. The Rock's blood-soaked, foul-mouthed, vicious campaign was incredible, and he was so locked in that he performed free of charge on Instagram and Twitter just to swear his head off and call Pharaoh shithead for the love of the game. On the Raw after WrestleMania 40, Rock essentially confirmed that he was going to return to WWE and face Cody at WrestleMania 41. Then, on the Raw is Netflix premiere, The Rock blew everything up. On the first show on the fabled road to WrestleMania, The Rock blocked his own path to Mania, all on his own. In his defense, all he really did was remove himself as a distraction from your fantasy booking, and it was kind of good that he clarified his status at least. Still, opening the show with a curtain call was a breathtakingly dumb choice, as was The Rock appearing to cancel, not merely postpone, the Cody match. Rock then appeared on NXT the next night and basically said that he wasn't owned for 15 minutes straight before slowly shrinking and turning into a corncob. He said nothing of substance. He swore for some cheap pops and kept saying he was getting emotional for some reason. The cynics reckon that The Rock has an origami ego and just needs to feel good about himself. It was very hard to argue with them on that night. He was unavailable for WrestleMania, but still played a part in John Cena's heel turn. His verbal performance when persuading Cody to part with his soul was yet more evidence of the thin skin. The man simply could not play an evil man without dropping in a few one-liners. In 2025, The Rock's head fell clean off. Number 5, Adam Copeland. Adam Copeland had a shocker in 2025, and he set the tone himself by renaming himself Cope early on. This was a disastrous nickname on at least 3 levels. Firstly, it's an insult used by young people online, and since Copeland actually had to cope in that infamously awkward exchange with Ricky Starks, it was all too fitting. It sounded like a name he'd have to use in TNA since Edge is WWE's intellectual property. What's Cope doing in the Impact Zone? Also, and this is the worst of all, he gave himself the nickname. AEW fans seem to like the guy, or at least they like Alter Bridge, but they don't love him like they do Hangman Page, Will Ospreay, or Orange Cassidy. Nobody other than Copeland himself shortened his surname affectionately, which made it seem as if the guy was in love with himself. This is a wrestler obsessed with his own lore, making constant callbacks to his history in WWE. If Cope left AEW and returned a few years down the line, he'd still be referencing Edge, for goodness sake. There's not much Cope has done on his own in AEW to warrant such a reference to his own promotion. His self-important streak notwithstanding, Cope's performance level verged on awful at times this year. His intense, dour promos continued the charade that the ultimate opportunist was actually Jack Reacher all along. He wanted to work, in his own words, a gritty NWA match against Jon Moxley at Revolution, which made his decision to go out and work a 2004 WWE main event a particularly boring mystery. He was mean-spirited and very unfunny in a mini-program against Stokely Hathaway, and while his team-up with Christian Cage was fun, it wasn't exactly amazing, was it? Number 4, Minoru Suzuki. Credit to Minoru Suzuki here, the man enjoyed a sensational post-prime run for a shocking number of years. Suzuki is such an incredibly expressive, tough-looking dude that all he had to do to get a reaction was glare with sadistic relish at opponents who were stupid enough to try him. Other times, he would just laugh at them, pissing himself at the very idea that their stuff could actually hurt him. Suzuki is very real, and his very real, very influential MMA credentials legitimized his act, but he also mastered pro wrestling theater. His facial expressions are among the greatest in wrestling history, so scary and funny and animated that he'd pull one and you'd forget in a moment that Suzuki would almost invariably lose, and thus wasn't that hard at all. But the magic finally deserted him a few years ago in truth, and in 2024 he lost in 9 minutes to Jack Perry on Collision. He had operated as a rent-a-badass for ages. A guy brought him for the entrance, a scowl and a job. He worked about as hard as Shindy-era honky-tonk man, and who could blame him? 2025, however, was Suzuki's nadir. While the match was far more bleak than a mere artistic misfire, his opponent was not fit to be in the ring. Suzuki's effort against Butterbean at WrestleCon in April was so bad that Dave Meltzer said it was the absolute worst wrestling match he had ever seen before. Worse even than the Bushwhackers versus the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov at Heroes of Wrestling. Even Jey Uso was doing better stuff than that. Speaking of which, number 3, Jey Uso.
Yep.
Is there an argument that one of the best wrestlers in the world today is implicit in the creative downfall of the entire industry? Because why is everybody trying to be Hangman Page? Page caught fire in AEW as a rare character with real emotional complexity. He was a funny badass and a surefire world champion, but he didn't believe in himself. He was plagued by self-doubt and anxiety in a relatable and resonant character arc that many of us identify with. He didn't think he was good enough to beat Kenny Omega one day, and when he did, his brilliant, bold approach informed one of the best moments in AEW history. WWE lifted this blueprint, casting Roman Reigns as the gaslighting heel overlord with his cousin Jey as the sympathetic, ambitious babyface. We are now 5 years deep into a story that in 2025 is truly pushing it. The people do love Jey Uso and have persisted with him despite multiple PLE disasters, but what do people like about him, really? Jey Uso is such a wild choice to cast as a character with such supposed emotional depth. He does cool and fun things with his hands and is not a particularly good wrestler. It's a bit like if Bushwhacker Luke constantly questioned his own sense of morality. Jey peaked as an underdog babyface at WrestleMania. It was a nice story which, if nothing else, cast doubt over the result of future Royal Rumble matches. Jey had made it. No more self-doubt. He was finally the man. After that, it was back to his various poorly acted crises of confidence. Back to a teased feud with Jimmy for some unexplainable reason. If you can believe it, Jey actually regressed further in the ring as well. He was so unskilled in 2025 that in his worst hour, he actually hit somebody else with a steel chair and took the most damage. I miss the days when goodies and baddies just got on with the business of hating one another. Number 2, Jacob Fatu. WWE in almost every way is better than it was under Vince McMahon. It is almost entirely devoid of baffling weirdness. Triple H isn't stupid enough to conceive of something like Eric Rowan befriending a giant spider, but he also isn't interesting enough to do that either. A lot has changed. WWE's TV is a lot better, but it's also not as much fun to discuss. Not everything has changed. Triple H is mostly different to Vince McMahon, but he has inherited his infuriating habit of doing things the WWE way, even if that way fails to harness the best attributes of certain wrestlers. It's irritating that this word has been overused to a point of meaningless because it's accurate, but Jacob Fatu has aura. He looks dangerous, his best stuff is dangerous, and he's actually an aggressive badass dude in a landscape of people with conflicted feelings as wrestling continues to overthink itself. Or at least he was. Fatu was a revelation when he debuted as a throwback pro wrestler. This year, because apparently it's the law, he started to act. Solo Sikoa tormented him and called him stupid. You are meant to feel sad for Jacob Fatu. WWE might as well have piped in the "aww" sitcom sound effect. And the monster eventually realized that Solo was manipulating him. Instead of saying, "I love you, Solo," when Jacob eventually turned his back on Sikoa at Money in the Bank, he said, "I hate you, Solo." This made mere exposition look like subtext. A diabolical, shenanigans-littered cage match with Solo Sikoa ended up doing nothing for him either. Legitimately, that's one of the worst matches I've seen all year. If you can't let the best ass kicker on your roster be the best ass kicker on the roster, what are we even doing here? Number 1, The New Day. The New Day turned heel on Big E on their 10th anniversary. This was a spectacular angle and possibly one of the very best in WWE history. The timing was particularly cruel since Big E was obviously hoping for a celebration of sorts. The tension was built gradually even before the night itself. The long-standing nature of the relationship between these guys needed a rift before the breakup. Also, Big E is famously one hell of a guy. It would have been a heartbreaking scene even if he hadn't been forced onto the WWE injury list indefinitely. WWE failed dismally to capitalize on the angle. The follow-up was entirely too cute. Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods were ostracized by the roster, even the heels, in what at first felt like a neat touch. The issue is that the New Day, who would have never had more heat in their lives, barely cut promos in the middle of the ring. And when they did, they were accompanied by offensively fake piped-in boos. You could argue that with Big E effectively retired, the New Day lacked a ready-made feud. But Triple H had a couple of options. He could have positioned a team for the role of Big E sympathizers, maybe DIY given Tommaso Ciampa's history with neck injuries, or he could also have not followed through with a flawed idea in the first place. This concerning, baffling lack of follow-up was an omen for the wider state of the year in retrospect. Looking at it now, the turn angle seems like a moment for the sake of a moment. No good story came out of it, so hey, isn't this supposed to be the storytelling promotion? Isn't this what everybody always says when people complain online? Eventually, the New Day settled into the role of a mildly amusing mid-card heel tag team. Xavier Woods did a bit with a large hat. He then did a hat on a hat joke by wearing a hat that was too small. This was pretty funny, but if ever there was a metaphor for how the arc turned out, well, there you go.
Hey, good video by What Culture Wrestling. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share the video. See y'all next time.